but again, welcome. Oh my gosh, good morning from Houston, University of South Carolina, Lockheed Martin in Georgia, St. Louis, from Bayer Company, United Health again, Mayo Clinic, just so many of you, Disney. Thank you so much for coming today. Again, I hope that we will be able to fill your toolbox with a few little things for your job and your skill set, add to your skill set. Welcome again to the National Center for Citizen Safety, NCSAFE is what we call it in abbreviation. And again, welcome to the challenges of forecasting the behavior of criminal minds. I do also want to do a shout out in regards to the COVID-19. I hope everyone is doing well and that they're experiencing good health. So that is first and foremost. My name is Lois Blevins. I am the founder and executive director for NCSAFE. And about 5 years ago, I felt that there wasn't enough public awareness in our communities as well as with our professionals. And I wanted to bring together people of great experience and particularly offer it, I'm a nonprofit, and offer it for free or at a very low cost. And that's what we've been doing for 5 years. We decided to do this particular webinar. It's a very general, broad brush of some of the challenges of forecasting behavior of criminal minds. We are going to have two more, one webinar and one symposium, a webinar in the summer that's going to go into more depth with this, and then a 2-day symposium in Boston University. We work with several different experts, such as Dr. Matos today, who is with Research Decision Alliances, and we also work with Aegis Consulting, and Barbara Golden, who's a retired Secret Service agent. So we've got a lot of people on board that can truly do some amazing things or answer some really great questions for you and your companies. With that said, again, I want to remind you just to put all your questions in the chat box, and then at the end, we will address all that. And it doesn't end here. Our experts are happy to answer any of your questions. I also have a really wonderful threat assessment checklist that I'm hoping will help you in your job. And with that, we'll talk about that at the end. And again, I wanted to talk about too that we're going to have an evaluation at the end. So stick with us to the end and we'll get some more info for you. With that said, I just wanted to talk about, why are we here? What is this about? How do we get this all to work into our job titles? Recent studies and analysis concluded, as you all probably know, there's a lot of experience on this webinar. There's no profile for an attacker. There's no profile for any type of target. Attackers usually have multiple motives. They most commonly involve grievances. Grievances motivated by a staff, a school, the staff or the students, romantic relationships, or other personal issues. Other motives include desire to kill, suicide, seeking fame and notoriety. Discovering a person of interest's motive for engaging in concerning behavior is critical to assessing the person's concern, of the person of concern's risk of engaging in violence, or identifying that appropriate intervention to change his or her behavior and manage that risk. Most attackers, as you well know, use firearms, and firearms were the most often acquired, but already previously owned or from the home. Most attackers have experienced three things. Again, most of you are probably aware of this: psychological, behavioral, and developmental symptoms. The observable mental health symptoms displayed by attackers prior to their attacks were divided basically into three categories: psychological, behavioral, and neurological and development. Again, all attackers experience some social stressors, sometimes multiple stressors, involving their relationships with peers, romantic partners. They've had issues with bullying, as well as from a young adult to youth, I should say, to a young adult. They also have, excuse me, I'm so sorry. They also have exhibited concerning behaviors, and that's what we're here for. What are we looking for? And this checklist is wonderful. It's called a threat assessment investigative checklist. And again, I can email that out to you. I'll show you a couple of bits and pieces of it when Dr. Matos is finished. Our briefing objective and agenda today. This webinar will allow you to identify, again, from a broad brush, general pre-attack behaviors for a person of concern. We're going to just kind of go through the path of looking at recent history. Dr. Matos will talk about criminal behavior and behavior indicators, introduction to a critical path analysis of violence, some examples of active assailant events over the last 30 years, which again, many of us know, but we're going to talk to that a little bit at length. This is only an hour, and then we'll try to talk to some of the current trending technology and nationwide efforts to evaluate pre-attack behaviors. Again, this is an hour, so we're going to try to get as much packed into here for you and to put into your toolbox. We've got the 2 additional events coming up, and we will adhere to all the questions, as many as we can, at the end of this presentation. This presentation is copyrighted, so we're asking to please not videotape or copy any of the materials. And I'm just going to give you a little introduction. Welcome, Dr. Matos. After Dr. Matos finished his undergraduate degree, he joined the United States Navy. He was a surface warfare officer. He was aboard the USS Garcia, the USS America, and he was on that during Operation Desert Storm and Shield. Rafael was deployed in the Kurtz, excuse me, in Japan. He was also a combat systems and command control communications and computer and intelligence officer. That's a long-winded title for the destroyer squadron in Florida. Dr. Matos also holds a degree in operations research from the Naval Postgraduate School and served in the requirements and assessment branch for the Chief of the Navy Personnel, as well as he served at the Pentagon. He, in 2013, graduated with a PhD in psychology, and he also is what I consider very honorable. He is a 2-time, not one, but 2-time survivor, once from the Pentagon, where he was on September 11th, 3 floors below where the American Flight 77 on the Western Wall hit during the unthinkable crash that we lost many lives to, God rest their souls. He witnessed that, he did response for that, and if that wasn't enough, he then retired and went to the consulting firm, and during that time, he was at the Washington Navy Yard and was there during the active shooter event. So he brings a lot more to the table than just his degrees and his work experience. Dr. Matos is a past president and chairman of the Board of Military Operations. He's also a co-chair for the Moore's Human Behavior and Performance Working Group and does quite a bit with the Analysis and Computation Social Services Working Group. He's a member of the APA, and he's also a member of several other, as listed there, organizations and associations. We'll also talk about the Association for Threat Assessment Professionals. I don't know if you already joined or you are a member. If you're not, that should be something that you should consider. And with that said, we'll talk a little more about that at the end. I'd like to introduce Dr. Matos. Thank you for joining us. And I don't want to waste any time. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'm going to stop sharing. And there you go, Dr. Matos.
All right, thank you, Lois. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can share my screen as we go. You got my screen now?
We do. It looks great.
Okay, super. I'm not seeing what I need to see here. There we go. Okay, so thank you again. This is a great venue to try to share some of the information that we have available. And not just for NICSAFE, and also I want to thank the community at large and everybody that has helped to put this together and the work that NixSafe has been doing for many years now. Our interest is to educate the public on how to respond to active assailant attacks and having a better understanding of what happens before those events occur is very critical. So we can probably identify them and try to stop them. And that's something that law enforcement and behavioral science have been trying to do. So in the interest of time, what I would like to do is to go through the slides. We'll put some comments in there and probably stick to some script and deviate a little bit as we go to add some more to it. But if you have any questions, please use the chat. It looks like it's working fine. We will monitor that, and then at the end, we'll go through some of the questions as we see fit based on the timing. Also, if there's the slides have a number at the bottom right. So if you have any specific questions about any of those specific slides, please give us the slide number and we'll try to answer that. To participate, we're gonna ask you to raise your hand. We'll unmute you and we can talk also directly if you have a question in the chat. Also, I want to acknowledge that there is a plethora of experts in the fields, in the areas that we're going to talk about. They're present, and we thank you for participating. And we will welcome your contributions today and in the future on all the efforts that we're trying to put together. Also, the individuals that are not familiar, and this is the first time getting exposed to this topic from the point that we're going to look at, we also welcome your questions and any enhancements and things that we can put together. So this is something I've done individually, personally, as an individual independent research, putting together some background data for Lois for her talks as we go and educate citizens on the response to active attack or active assailant. Now, the thing is that profiling criminal behavior and the behavior of criminal minds was popularized in Hollywood through many films and television shows like Mindhunter and Silence of the Lambs, if you remember back then. There's some popular shows. There's one that didn't last too long, Unknown Subject, The Millennium Profiler, and one of my favorite, Criminal Minds, that highlights some of the work that the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit does, and mainly for repeat offenders, that are maintaining some kind of trace. And we look at those, and the work that the Behavioral Analysis Unit has done in the past has been terrific. Minority Report is another film that is of interest to us. If you recall, with Tom Cruise playing the head of this pre-crime unit that's trying to predict a crime before it happened. And there is some big machine and trying to put together some forecast in the future and trying to stop the crimes before they started. And we're gonna revisit that. Now, through the decades and all the events that we have seen in the recent past that have been highly covered by the media have incited some additional interest looking at what are we doing and how we can best respond to these events. So there's some significant attention to human behavior and what happens before the event occurs. If we look at some of the history, here in the center, I have a picture of Rebecca Schaeffer. She was an actress in Hollywood that was killed in 1989 by a fan that was obsessed with her. And before that time, the LA Police Department was having a hard time trying to figure out what was happening with all these stalkers for non-famous people and trying to stop some of those crimes and detecting what could be done against them. But then when Rebecca Schaeffer died, the Hollywood community kind of put a big highlight on that. And that incited some additional changes and a paradigm shift within the LA Police Department, trying to see what was going on, in the community. So this guy was obsessed with Rebecca Schaefer, comes in a couple of times during the day, and he felt that she had disrespected him. And even though he had some flowers and a CD that he wanted to give her, he also had a firearm in his bag and decided to shoot her. So that did not work well. But anyway, with that, a few months later, or actually a couple of years later, 1995, this city electrician that was obsessed with the performance evaluation from his job went to Piper Tech Center downtown, and he shot 4 supervisors to death. And that became another highlight of what was going on. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the Secret Service has also been developing some of the background or some of the substance for evaluating potential threats against the president. This was led by a former agent from the Reagan security detail. But that collaboration with mental health experts was not really very well known. It was not something that was being done as much as we do today, because that required a paradigm shift. It didn't go along using behavioral scientists against law enforcement, but there's no clear understanding on the probable causes that somebody might commit a crime. And as this was developing through the years, very slowly, suddenly we had Columbine. So Columbine really created that big change. These 2 individuals plotted for many months to slaughter their classmates. They really wanted to decimate that school with bombs, and they were going to place them in many different places, and then set themselves outside with the rifles to shoot the people as they were coming out. Well, the bombs didn't go out. The trigger mechanism that they used did not work, so they decided to go in and start the rampage that we're familiar with. After that event, there have been many copycats events that happened trying to outdo these guys and what they did, and a big cult that was developed from that. Now, another thing that they started after Columbine, they left some information of why they wanted to do this. They wanted to inspire others for future school shootings. They kept discussing amongst themselves on Hollywood directors fighting amongst themselves and who was going to put the movie on their lives or what they did. And they had some documents and texts that talk about that. So those, call these legacy tokens, leave behinds, that now include some specific manifestos from many assailants that give us an idea of what was building up to the point of them carrying out these events. So with that information, we can probably use that and get that evidence of the stalkers and mass murderers to try to set up some kind of trends that can be identified to look at that behavior. Also, in addition to the Columbine cult and people that have been going back to Columbine and attempted some of this, we have the numbers here of about 74, 53 of them have been stopped, and 21 actually occur. The fan that killed Rebecca Schaefer, first example that I gave you, he was obsessed with John Lennon, and he sent a letter to the man that was in prison for killing John Lennon in 1980. And when he fled from the building after killing Schaefer, he left behind a copy of the book, The Catcher in the Rye, which was one that was the famous killer of John Lennon sat down to read after he killed Lennon. The President Reagan's shooter also had a copy of the book and a John Lennon photo calendar in his hotel room just before he went to attempt to shoot the president. Now, as these events have been being collected through the years, some research suggests that some of these motives can be summarized in this kind of like a quick acronym, just to make it easy to remember, on a couple of areas that may trigger potential bad behavior, okay? It doesn't necessarily be a crime, but they are baselines for potential crime. And conscience being one where individuals feel that they are threatened. This is not something that they would do naturally, but by coercion, blackmail, or extortion, they're forced to carry out some malicious intentions. And that is one that happens from external sources. Revenge is another one for somebody like the shooter of Rebecca Schaefer. I'll never mention their names because they don't deserve that notoriety. But revenge and people that feel that they have been insulted or disrespected, and they try to take back some revenge against family members, and it happens quite a bit with individuals that have a previous lover that is not doing well with them, and they break up, and things like that work in the same way with their employer, with a former employer that did not do, or they get fired for some reason and they don't understand and they are angry. So anger management is another aspect of this that we're not going into details, but that's another topic that we can talk about at length. Ideology, like we see fanatics and extremists that look at the way that they believe things should be, and things are not being done the way that they expect. So based on their ideology, they carry out some of these attacks to make a statement based on their ideology. And we see that in national defense type national security protection, the intelligence community, but also with private industry, people looking at former employees that may come back because they're upset for something that happened. Money is a root of all evil, and we've heard that phrase before. People that are in financial trouble and they think that the best thing that they can do is to resort to criminal activity. And that goes a long way. Same with ego. That goes similar to the revenge when people their ego has been deflated and they have been disrespected, or they have low self-esteem. That's another aspect of ego. And they don't feel that their lives are worth living. They carry out an event like this to make a statement for themselves. They know they're not going to survive, and they just try to do as much damage as possible because they're that angry. Okay, now, so that's a very big brush, and there's a lot of details behind any of these, but these are typical things that we have seen with the data that has been collected. Now, somebody that may exhibit one of these individually doesn't mean that they're a criminal, but there are also multiple other behaviors that have been identified. There are some indicators that we can look at. There are many of them, and too many to cover during this talk, but we'll cover some of those that have been associated with these behavioral traits that in many cases have resulted in individuals taking advantage of their positions to either steal property, proprietary information, also a preamble for workforce violence, domestic abuse cases, and mass murder. And we see them, they're probably a little bit small, but just changes in personality, behavior, and their work habits. Substance abuse, an increase in substance abuse, and addictive behaviors, alcoholic, drug abuse. Financial change, I mentioned about financial troubles. And that could go either way. It can be some unexplained financial affluence. Maybe they're selling secrets from your company. They're selling secrets from national security and getting some additional money from somewhere because of some of those behaviors and the way that they feel, or they are in excessive debt and they are just feeling that that's okay. So with that excessive debt, that may trigger them to go in the direction of committing some crimes to get the money to pay their debts. Being disgruntled to the point of wanting to retaliate. We mentioned about the retaliation. Many years ago, there was a string of attacks in post offices and people, disgruntled employees going postal. And that phrase of people, don't make me go postal, it was because back then, and I have a chart that shows when that happened, and that became a thing, and people started looking more internally, organizations looking at what is it making my employees so angry that they may come back and retaliate and carry out an event like this. We see disregard for security procedures and lacking or trying to go around security procedures within the organizations. Classified information, getting some access to proprietary information that they're not supposed to, and they may be asking somebody, hey, can you show me the blueprints for the next whiz bang that the company is building? Or within national security, some classified information has been labeled and they want to access things that, even though they may have the clearance, but they don't have the need to know. There may be some indication, why do you want to see this? And those are initial flashes that things may not be correct. Getting access to facilities that they don't have the information, that they're outside working hours, they have specific working hours, they're coming in a little early or much earlier than normal, or staying later than everybody else. Maybe they were accessing some things. And it's not to become paranoid, but these are small indicators that can be put together, and as they collect, may indicate that would point us in a direction that somebody may be attempting to commit some kind of crime. Okay, so continue with that. Behavioral science has shown, in a combination with mathematics, that it's more productive to attempt to understand why and how someone has chosen the path that they did, just looking at the human element that goes behind that. And with this insight, we may be better suited or better equipped to anticipate their movement down the path that they have chose, and we can probably intervene before something bad happens, or intervene if necessary. Maybe they have some low self-esteem problems. Maybe they're being disrespected, and somebody within the organization, somebody that knows these individuals, may be able to intervene and engage and try to help. Behavioral scientists assist with some of the research and trying to identify and explain and contextualize, give some substance to some of these behaviors based on the research that has been done from a human behavior point of view, and provide some customizable analytic tools that exist today to do this. And they're very fluid. The more we know, the better we make them. So that is very important, to trying to coordinate that information from law enforcement and behavioral science experts to try to attack this problem. Now, organizational culture is an important aspect of this, because the group mindset, or the group culture, the organizational culture, functions to us as a lens that can influence the attitudes and the perceptions and behaviors of these individuals. If I've done many projects with multiple organizations, with Secret Service, with VA, with all the military services, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the culture in each one of these locations is different. And they may be looking at similar problems, but their cultural background, that specific society, micro society, have their own way of carrying out themselves and behave themselves. And understanding that allows us to better understand the way that the individuals perform. And when somebody feels out of place within the organizations, that organizational culture may be detrimental to them because they may not feel that they fit in. And that can trigger some individuals to try harder, and that can be very stressful, and some to give up and just feel less than, and then be depressed and feeling that they're in the wrong place. That's not good. So critical path analysis is an approach that has been used with businesses and medical fields to identify the relationships and processes that are more critical, and trying to identify the most defenseless points in organizations, trying to get some part of the threat assessment. Where is the critical path? But from the individual point of view. So these four elements that we're listing here are just general categories that give us at least some framework to evaluate how to move down that path and identify where potential malicious intent may happen. We're going to look at these individually. With personal predispositions, we see that with the data that we have, typically normal and well-adjusted individuals rarely commit hostile or criminal acts. Is uncharacteristic. But some individuals that have some personal characteristics that predispose them to behave in away from society norms is what we see here. And those are things that may be physiological as well as psychological. May have some medical and psychiatric conditions, some chemical imbalance in the brain in some areas that do not allow them to identify right from wrong, or lack of adjustment or lack of self-control in many events, anger management. So that could be part of a physiological aspects, or some people have the predisposition because that's the way biologically they part of their makeup. And there's some social network risks in terms of how they behave within the social context, being extroverts or introverts. That can go in potential good ways and potentially bad ways, depending on who they are and what that cultural environment is that I mentioned before. If they have had some previous rule violations, they have committed some small crimes, or they have done something and get away with it, the tendency is that they were going to do it again because it worked the first time, so why not do it again? And that previous rule violation tenet can escalate and can start getting bigger, from taking as a teenager or a child going to the store and taking some gum from the counter and nobody said anything. And then every time they went to the store, that adrenaline and what's going on, they want to see what they can get away with. So that can continue to escalate and then into adulthood and become more problematic. Personality and social skills also speaks to that social network, where they are developing themselves and how they are seen with others. And that can be some predisposition in there. And this decision-making deficits, I mentioned a little bit about that, the inability of selecting right from wrong based on their upbringing, of what they have decided that is right and is not right. Some of the stressors that we see here can be positive and negative. There's some personal, financial, and professional aspects that can enhance our personalities and how we move forward. But also when things go into the negative side, they can trigger a response that is very very outside of the societal norms. That's what look at the stressors. There's very stressful when a personal relationship starts not working the way that we expect it. Let's say the domestic violence problems, situations with ex-lovers, how they feel personally within their own circles. So that can be something that is extremely stressful. Financially, we also mentioned about that a little bit before. So these three, the personal relationships, money, and professional in the job, there's a triangle that has been identified in many research of being the ones that really can create enough stress in an individual to bring them to the point that they decide to commit some criminal act. So professionally, something that happens on the job, they're not getting the promotion that they expected. They feel that no matter how hard they work, things are not working the right way for them. So what's going on there? And it's very stressful when individuals get to that position, and that is something that they cannot control. It's beyond their control. So when that happens, there's some behaviors that are expressed within the list of these concerning behaviors. And some of them we also mentioned before: interpersonal relationships, technical inabilities. They start getting not as technically capable as they were before. Financially independence and financially irresponsible. Personal relationships, getting the need for mental health evaluation, and how they develop themselves within their social networks. Within that, the last piece is this element of the critical path model is not just the individuals and what they express, but what's happening in the organizations, how they're paying attention to these individuals. Is there a program, a risk assessment process in place that can identify these behaviors and do something about it? Probably intervene and make them part of a way that we can help them before something bad happens. With this COVID-19 happening and some other events when the economy goes down and some organizations need to summarily dismiss their employees for whatever reason, that can be extremely stressful. And if the organization doesn't have a plan in place to prevent some of the stress that this may cause, that can also be part of that critical path. Let's take a look back at some studies that have been done. The FBI did a study that looked at active shooters incidents in the US from 2000 to 2013. And we see the spread here. There's a lot of research being done in this. And we see the numbers and the typical behaviors and how most of them are single shooters. They have done some kind of event called kill the family member before they go out in public to carry out the attack, because they probably don't want the family members to talk about their history. Also, they tend to commit suicide. They probably are so disgruntled and so out of life that there's a tendency most of them commit suicide, and most of them do it at the scene. But all of this research has been put together to give us an indication that these events are not impulsive. People don't flip all of a sudden and then go out and commit an event. These things build up with time, and they're very well thought out and planned. And if there's an indication in there somewhere that we can identify before they occur, maybe there is a possibility that we can intervene and avoid them. So there's the promise of a threat assessment being instrumental to doing this. So that was from 2000 to 2013. From 2014 to 16, we had the active assailant study that looked at small sample of 63 shooters. And again, most of them were male, premeditated. And we started looking at some of these concerning behaviors that we mentioned. And we see a pattern here: financial strain, problems at work, marital difficulties, conflict with the family. But that's not all. We also have depression, narcissism, poor coping skills, low frustration tolerance, lack of trust with others. fascination with violence-based entertainment, some of these games that are very violent. Identifying with negative role models, that also has been part of that low self-esteem. And then the access to weapons actually doesn't help, of course. But in the study, there's also a highlight that many of these stressors that were classified under mental health, there was no confirmed diagnosis of mental illness. There was a deviation at mental health by thinking that they did not behave according to the norm of society. So they must have some mental health issues. And investigating on these, most of them did not really have a clear understanding, or not clear understanding, but a clear diagnosis of mental illness. They had not been diagnosed. So there isn't a root cause here that mental illness is a root cause for these events. There's some other things going on in there. So we have to be very careful in looking at them very closely. So here's a chart with a depiction of some of these mass shootings. And again, next day, if we concentrate on mass shooting events, trying to help our citizens to be prepared and how to respond to them. So understanding how this happened give us a better way to talk to our citizens and train them on this. So here's the United States Postal Service shootings, 1986, Lewis in Texas. Then there's so many, Columbine. In 9/11, when 9/11 happened, there's a big gap in here, but then we see each one of these bubbles represents an event. And this is from a database that is maintained by Mother Jones in July 2012 after the shooting in Aurora, Colorado. Mother Jones created this database documenting mass shootings. And the research is focusing on events where public events in public places where 4 or more victims were killed by the attacker. Okay, so that's what we see here. Newtown, Connecticut, Orlando. Now, Mother Jones is not the only one collecting some of this data. There are some other large databases that look at crime in general. For our purposes, this is what we collected, and we have access to some others that can probably explain some other crimes, some other criminal behavior. But here we're just looking at mass shootings for now. Now, after Orlando, I stretched that, and we saw here, this is from year to year in the x-axis, from 2016 to 2020. 2020, more of the recent ones. I had to break it by month because they were so clumped together. There's so many of these events going on. So Orlando happened in June of 2016 with this guy, security guard, killed 49 people, and seemed to be a random event. Some people thought it was a targeted event against the LGBT community, but it was not. He went to a couple of other locations with his weapons, but there were just a strip of bars and nightclubs in Orlando. And the first one that he went to, there was an altercation outside, so he decided to move on and go to another one. When he went to the other one, another altercation, some big fight started with police presence. So he moved on, get away from that one, and then ended up going to the polls. So it was not targeted as it was initially believed. He was just wanting to create a lot of damage, and that's what he did. So then we have Las Vegas, we're familiar with that, and some others with the churches, synagogue in Pittsburgh and El Paso, Texas at the Walmart. As these continue to happen, they seem to be disparate. There's some patterns, but the intentions behind it were not very well understood. Now, if we look at the mathematics, there's a lot of great research being done looking at this events and statistical analysis that have been put together. There's multiple mathematical forecasting techniques that we use today, and they're scientifically based and very analytically rigorous. But the problem is that this problem that we have at hand is extremely complex. Could it be bounded as we do with the weather, with multiple variables in the weather and some other things like intelligence? We collect information from many different areas. Perhaps, maybe we can. Now, the challenge is that organizations and leadership try to oversimplify and look for what is the good enough solution so we can move forward. And that can be good, but also can be limiting. Logistic regression is just one method, and it's very robust, trying to identify yes or no result. When we have multiple variables with the coefficient and how much weight each one of these variables have, that can be indicators or behaviors which have some weight, and it's similar to what we use for detecting heart attacks, and somebody that exhibits some indications and some symptoms and some propensity for having a heart attack, yes or no, with some probability. Coronavirus right now, if you have some specific indicators that you may have the virus, there may be a way with an equation similar to this. Can we use something like this to identify some of the behavior? It is possible, and there's some more robust equations and some more robust mathematics that look at this, yes or no, guilty or not guilty, the potential of things happening, yes or no. All these studies are looking at the propensity that individuals have based on those attributes to carry out these events, this potential, and have been grouped in these three trajectories, being the group identification, some ideology, or social pressures, because they don't feel that they fit, okay? So what are we doing today? Some of the things that we have done in the past, the Department of Homeland Security had this future attribute screening technology system that looked at physiological and psychological indicators of individuals going through points of entry, but that was it was not without controversy, because there's a potential for civil liberties breakouts, and some senior researchers determined that the premise of this approach, that identifiable physiological and psychological behaviors by themselves can be uniquely identified with malicious intent, is mistaken. But there's more work being done in that direction. We have also this predicting policing that is happening, is being used across the country to predict where potential events are happening, or the hotspots where criminal activity is occurring. And this all used for resource allocation and identifying the areas where police and law enforcement can go and engage. Okay. Now, here we go. Another one that we have is this extreme protective orders. Since 1999, Connecticut was the first state. The intention of this to try to remove firearms from a person that may present danger to themselves or to others. So 1999, Connecticut put the first one. And then before 2018, only 5 states had some version of this, but it was not until after the Parkland shooting in February of 2018 that that number more than doubled. And as of today, 19 states, I checked out yesterday, 19 states, including the District of Columbia, has some version of these red flag laws, looking at potential indications and trying to get a protective order. It's not directly as a protective order, it's more than that. It's trying to help somebody that may show indications that they may be a threat to themselves or to others based on some specific criteria, and the judge can give that order. This goes along similar to what the Department of Homeland Security See Something, Say Something campaign is trying to do. As we see some behavior, something that doesn't look right, to speak and bring it up to the attention to those that may be able to help. Does it help? Has it helped? Well, in some cases it has, and we have a couple that after the shooting in El Paso were stopped, and there was all over the news within 3 days. Some of these events happened, and authorities stopped these individuals, 22, 25-year-old, another 20-year-old, that expressed in social media that they wanted to commit a crime. They were obsessed of getting attention. One of them said that he wanted to be known as the next most famous school shooter. Another one said a good 100 kills will be nice. School is a weak place, so I'm going to go to a large area so I can shoot more people. So with those indications, they were stopped, and after some research and investigation, they found that they were in fact getting ready, and not just 3. There was more of them, multiple since El Paso that have been stopped. Now, is this the new normal? And Brian Levin, the director of the Center of Study of Hate and Extremism, has said that, that quote in here, that the people are going to stop this is not often necessarily directly law enforcement, but those who are closer to them. But we need to identify these behaviors. We need to be more familiar with what these potential behaviors are, so we don't get some false positives and get some people that are not potentials, and then an innocent person may go into a bad situation. Can we rely more on people to report on this? Maybe the behavioral science studies and the research being done, or is the answer somewhere in between? And I think it is somewhere in between. We can do something about this, and there's a lot more that can be done. And be mindful with the time. This is my last slide. We know that these behaviors vary tremendously from specific individual and circumstantial opportunity to very uncharacteristic behavior. It can be from propensity and can be something that is just opportunistic. But there is something in there with these individuals that may trigger them to build up to get to the point where they may carry out an event like this. Much more can still be done, and that's the intent that we're trying to just initiate this spark. In the meantime, reporting this suspicious behavior continues to be a very successful potential strategy, as we have seen. Okay, so we have a lot of references, a lot of research being done, and I'm sure most of you are more familiar with a lot more that exists out there based on your specific areas. And we're looking forward to your inputs, and I hope that this was enough to get a trigger. So with that, we will get to some questions.
Dr. Matos, I think Galaxy S10 wants to open up for a question.
Okay, let me stop sharing here. Where are we? Oh, okay. See. Okay, you're muted. Galaxy S10? You have your hand raised?
Maybe he raised his hand by accident. Okay.
Maybe not.
Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Matos? I see one new message coming up. Oh, no, he said he unfortunately, okay, he hit that by accident. He said, there's another one from Justin Newman. Thank you for your question, Justin. Will there be a recording available for this training or the slide deck? Yes, we will have this, we are recording it right now, and we will have this available on our website, which is nextsafe.org, for your future viewing. And I know a couple other people asked me so they could show it to their colleagues. Absolutely. Thank you for your compliment. The training is fantastic. He's had several interruptions. So I've had too many interruptions related to COVID issues. So he hasn't been able to listen in totality. So good. We'll be able to have that available for you, and several others that asked. Any other questions? The learning doesn't stop here. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate. I know most of you are true threat assessment professionals out there. in varying levels. So hopefully, thanks to Dr. Matos for imparting us on his amazing information. And again, we're going to have the 2 webinars forthcoming, one in July and one in fall, a symposium, a 2-day in Boston. I'm just going to flip over here to my screen to just talk about a couple other things and share my video. So I just wanted, again, if you're interested in this threat assessment investigative checklist, it was designed and put together by Aegis Consulting, who does a lot of our law enforcement training. They are amazing. They've already, we're in very much support of the TAPS Act to give federal funding to the private and public sector to help stand up threat assessment units in law enforcement, and then be able to parlay that into some of the private sector as well. With that said, we've been on the Hill, we've promoted this bill, but most importantly, the TAPS Act will give us some funding, again, for the law enforcement entities. With that, they have been down to North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and done week-long training for those law enforcement entities to help them stand up threat assessment units. They are very much ready, armed and ready to do anything for public or private sector. For any of you that are interested, let me know. They'll be doing the 2-day symposium in October. We're in the throes of that right now. And then they'll also be doing one component of this threat assessment in a webinar this summer. So this is a 10-page threat assessment investigative checklist that helps you go through a myriad of points and evaluative questions, such as things that you might want to ask the victim or victims, as well as the person of concern. So let us know if you want that. I'll email that to you. Again, I want to thank Dr. Matos. I want to thank all of you. Some of you came in late. You sent me emails. So I understand you want to see the whole thing in its totality. That's perfectly fine. We're going to have that on the website, as I just said a minute ago. So some other things that I wanted to talk about was, if you haven't read this book, Blink, please take some time to read it. It's Malcolm Gladwell. It's excellent. Some people even teach a threat assessment class, and they make you preempt reading this book before the class. It draws on some cutting edge neuroscience and psychology to reveal the difference between good decision-making and bad. And it's just an amazing book. It talks about some really interesting aspects of making quick decisions. I also want to say that both of those symposium events are going to go further into the pathway to violence with 2 retired Secret Service agents with Aegis, and they've got about 75 years total of threat assessment. They're the ones that have done a multitude of work with TAPS Act and training up some of the law enforcement in North Carolina, South Carolina, and I think Florida as well after Parkland. And I also wanted to say that we are going to have an evaluation link and a video again on the website. NextSafe in of itself has about over 200 years of threat assessment and law enforcement experience with all of our board members and our participants that help us do the training and conduct the training. I myself started this, I said to you earlier, for those that came in late, we've been stood up for about 5 years. We've done a lot of community level training, which has been outstanding, thanks to all my amazing partners. Most importantly, we've done private sector as well. If you're interested, we can do a webinar in a very low level active assailant training. With that, I also wanted to tell you that we are happy that hopefully you filled your toolbox today. You can give us a high five. We do everything on donation. So if you want to give us a $5 high five donation for today, that's great. NextSafe, NCCSAFE.org. And again, join TAPS. Support the TAPS Act so it can support you in both public and private sector. And I think we might have some questions. Hold on. Let me just look in the chat. Let's see, stand by. Oh, somebody said they also, yes, it's a great book. Gavin DeBecker's book, The Gift of Fear, is a very good book. Thank you for suggesting that, Mike and Lisa. Several of you have asked for the presentation, the checklist. And Disney, you want to share that with your team? Excellent. Would love to send that out. I will send that to all the participants. Actually, I'll go ahead and send it out to everybody. If you have any questions whatsoever, let us know. Our professionals are online all the time. They've been amazing. So my shout out to all of you for being a part of NextSafe. Any other questions? Thank you for your compliments. We will be sharing the website, the webinar on our website. So yes, you can share that. We're all about getting this information out and making it financially feasible. Aegis is readily available to travel. So if you would like to talk to any of them, those retired special agents with Secret Service. I also am a still with Secret Service. I've got 33 years, so I'm a little old. I've done a plethora of threat assessment work as well as training, and that was one of the reasons why I started this nonprofit. With that said, I'm going to thank Dr. Mitz of Matrodon is also a good book, someone said. Thank you for your feedback. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you've had a great webinar and a lunch and learn. We'll keep up with you. We've got your emails. For those of you that didn't get the notification, we'll probably change some of that up. Because of Zoom security issues, we wanted to get the registrations first and then send out the link. So thank you, MO89191. Awesome webinar. Keep it up. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day. Please, please be safe with COVID-19. This is unprecedented, as we've heard 100 times. So be healthy, stay safe, and thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Matos.